Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Asian Football Show. This is episode number 49. I'm Erfan, and like always, I'm very glad to be joined by my co hosts, Arya and Kenta. Arya, how are you doing?
Doing very well, thank you so much. Very excited for this one. Kenta, how are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing well. We're not recording all these in chronological order of when they're coming out. So this is our final episode from the series that we're recording. And yeah, it's a good one. It's Japan, it's the country as well. So
Yeah, and today we're joined by Rio. If you follow us on Twitter, you probably know him as well, obviously covering Japanese football. Rio, how are you doing today?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm doing quite well, thanks. Excited to be here and talk about the Japan national team heading into the World Cup. Today, the day we're recording is actually, we're a month away now officially, so it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, obviously, make sure to check Rio out if you already don't. Everything to do with Japanese football, J League, you'll be able to find in his account. Also, I want to mention today, well, actually yesterday, by the time this episode is out, would be the Asian Football Show's third year anniversary. So we're officially 3 years old. This started out as me and Arya just a sort of side thing we were doing, and then Kenta joined us later on, and we're very happy in the path that we're going. So before we start, anything you want to mention, Arya, about that?
Yeah, no, it's great to see the evolution of this podcast. I'm very excited for the future of this. And yeah, Kenta, is there anything you want to add?
no, it's good that it's the same age as Erfan now. So we have a podcast the same age as old as Erfan is in years. No, I think I've mentioned this multiple times, but it's an honor to be a part of this group, and I know it was a rather late addition, all things considered, but no, it's a really cool milestone, and hopefully we have more than 3 more years in the future past this.
Hopefully we do. Now let's get straight to the topics. Before we talk about the actual World Cup, let's talk about qualification. I mean, let's be honest, Japan had no real issues in qualifiers, even though they were in a somewhat difficult group with the likes of Australia and Saudi Arabia for the third cycle in a row, I believe. So talk to us about qualification and how that went.
Right. So qualification pretty much happened right after the disastrous Asian Cup in 2024. Right. Well, the round 2 happened a bit before and then a bit after, and then we really hit into the round 3, the actual qualifiers. But anyway, so yeah, when we talk about Japan's qualifying, cycle this time around, we really everything really does start with that Asian Cup, right? So all things considered, it was a catastrophe by any measure or any kind of rubric you want to put on Japan, right? But that also meant drastic changes to how the team plays. So since the 2022 World Cup, Japan were mostly playing a back 4, right? And a 4-2-3-1, pretty, standard kind of formation. And we were playing pretty well with it, but a number of different issues cropped up throughout the Asian Cup. And then that's why we switched to this, it's like a 3-5, 3-4-2-1, 3-4-3, however you want to, scramble it kind of formation. But, the key thing about this Japan side playing in that formation was how we put very attacking players at wing back compared to some other teams that might be playing more traditional wing backs or full backs or more defensive minded players. Japan really kind of put actual wingers and attackers in those positions. And for me, it made a lot of sense, right? Because I know, especially in the Asian context, Japan is always going to have the ball, 60-some, in some cases, even more possession in most games. So trying to throw on as many attackers as possible is probably the right way to do things. And I think it made sense here, and also made us a bit more secure at the back with having 3 center backs throughout, right? And so, yeah, and yeah, like you said, Erfan, the qualification cycle went pretty well, I should say. And and because we were playing in this new formation throughout these very official and serious games, that allowed the players leading up to the World Cup right now to get really used to this formation And over the past 2 years, it's really been, this formation robust, and it's clearly going to be something that we're going to be using at this World Cup. And I guess we could talk about the friendlies a bit later, but there's always we can always play a back four if we need to with this formation and with the kind of profiles we have at center back. We have lots of players who are very versatile, that can play fullback and center back at different times, right? So there's always those kind of different options, right? Because if you remember at the 2022 World Cup, we were also coming in with a pretty bog standard 4-2-3-1, and then and then at half times against Germany, we'll switch to a back three and then just go man to man pressing, and so there's always going to be some kind of ace up Moriyasu's sleeve, I imagine. And the nice thing is that even with all these injuries, which I think we'll get to a bit later in the podcast, we have so many versatile players who play at a high level that they can kind of just keep switching in. So yeah, in that sense, the Asia qualification was pretty comfortable, and it was quite nice because compared to the 2022 cycle or even the past ones, we had the talent, but we really struggled in the a lot kinder to my kind of stress levels and all that. And I was at the actual Bahrain game when we qualified at Saitama Stadium, and it was a really great moment. That's probably one of my core memories now.
I think it makes it even more impressive because you guys finished first in a group with two, heavy hitters in the AFC alongside Australia and Saudi Arabia. So I think that makes it ultimately a lot better. Moving on to the World Cup itself, Japan has been drawn in Group F alongside the Netherlands, Tunisia, and Sweden, considered to be a tough group for Japan, one must say. I'm going to focus more on the Netherlands here, the first game on June 14th in Texas. So yeah, Netherlands, we all know who they have, many good players, Virgil van Dijk, Tijani Reinders, etc., etc. They finished top of their World Cup qualifying group, which isn't much of a surprise either. Fun fact, Netherlands beat Japan 1-0 back in 2010. Not that matters nowadays, but just an extra fact to throw in there. What do you think about this opening game, and how do you think it's going to go?
Yeah, this one is going to obviously be very tough. Yeah, because, and especially this being the first game, it means a lot to how the rest of the group games are going to go. On Japan, historically, if they lose their first game, they usually crash out. Of course, with the third place team being able to, continue on, depending on, goal difference or other factors, it might not matter this time, but nevertheless, in terms of morale and all that kind of stuff and momentum and everything that's so important, these kind of short, medium term kind of tournaments. Yeah, getting a good result against the Netherlands is going to be really, really important. And, while the Netherlands, as you said, have tons of really, amazing world-class players, as a team, I feel like they've not been that great, especially compared to the actual talent they have, right? Ronald Koeman, especially as a manager, is someone that's, he's not, really highly rated by a lot of people at the club and the national team level, I think. So that's a big question mark there. But nevertheless, they've got guys that, even when they don't play well, just one, moment of magic from, someone like, Depay or, Van Dijk from a set piece. And that's the kind of team the Netherlands are. I've seen a few of their qualifying games and a few of their friendlies so far. And they're not the free flowing side that especially from Japan's point of view, Moriyasu has made this first game as a big priority in terms of hitting the ground running and trying to win the group and all of that. So this is going to be a really tough one, but it's one that Japan's going to have to try and get a result in first and foremost.
Second match day, travel over to Mexico and Monterrey to play a slightly familiar foe in Tunisia. I remember back in, this would have been 2022, there's the Kirin Challenge Cup during the summer then, where Japan kind of surprisingly lost 3-0 in Suita, Panasonic Stadium, in that friendly, in that final, after beating Ghana pretty convincingly in the match day before, during that window before the World Cup. And then, a year later, Japan kind of get their revenge against Tunisia in another friendly later on, and I think in Kobe that match was hosted. So some history there. Obviously, they've faced each other in the World Cup before in 2002. And obviously in a different venue, there's an elevation factor in there that might not, exist in the match. The match is held in Dallas, the first and third match day. I'm curious what you expect from this match. If you have a certain result that you expect from the second match day. But yeah, also what sort of challenges Tunisia presents to this Japanese national team.
Right, so I think Tunisia is going to be an interesting challenge, mostly because, they changed their manager quite recently after their AFCON campaign went pretty poorly, right? They got rid of Trabelsi and they brought in Lamouchi. Lamouchi, who some people might remember was the Ivory Coast manager at the 2014 World Cup, and he was the one that helped beat Japan on match day 1 of the 2014 World Cup. So a lot of Japanese people are quite wary of that fact, and because clearly Lamouchi did his homework on that day in 2014, and he's clearly going to be doing it again for Tunisia this time around in 2026. And also with the managerial change, I've also seen a huge amount of turnover in terms of the squad and the starting 11 selection between the end of the AFCON in January to the March friendlies. So it's really, really difficult to kind of get an idea of how things are going to change, right? So I was watching Tunisia versus Nigeria earlier today, but three of the back four weren't even invited in March. So there's I think two of those players were just injured, so they're probably going to be showing up in June next month. It was Jan Valery and Dylan Braun that were injured in March. But that's why it's so hard, right? That's why I have to kind of wait until the June friendlies right before the World Cup. They're going to be playing 2 European teams, I think. Yeah, they're playing Austria and Belgium, right? So so I can't really say anything right now, unfortunately, because there's just been too much change, and they play Canada and Haiti in March, but I don't think those matches really gave too much away because he rotated a lot and tried a lot of different younger guys as well. And also one player that I'm really interested in is Rani Khedira. They switched him over to Tunisia and got him in for March, and he's clearly going to be one of the key midfielders alongside Elias Skiri. I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing that right, who's, Doan's teammate at Eintracht Frankfurt, right? So clearly Tunisia are that kind of team that are going to be bunkering down a lot against pretty much anybody and everybody, right? Cracking that defense, especially at the World Cup stage, it's definitely going to be hard. So that's going to be a challenge for Japan. Yeah.
And then moving on to the final group stage game where Japan will be taking on Sweden. And, obviously this is the team from pot 4. And I think it's a bit unlucky for Japan because if you're getting a top pot 4 team, you probably don't want it to be one of the European playoff winners. And, this Sweden team is very different to Sweden from a year ago. Obviously, they qualified for the playoffs via the Nations League route after performing very, very badly in qualifiers. Then Graham Potter took over, and then they were able to beat Ukraine and then Poland at home in qualifiers, which was a very, very good game. And they have quality, obviously with Gyökeres, Isaac, Elanga, so the quality is there. And again, this game will be back in Texas. What do you make of this game? What do you expect?
This is probably I've kind of said this for each team. Sorry, but each even Sweden also is kind of hard, right? And it's not just because of the team itself. It's also because it's his third match day, right? So both Japan and Sweden could have let's say around 4 to 6 points in the first 2 games, and then they might just rotate their entire squad, both teams. And so it might not really be much of a actual serious match, right? And that's kind of the difficult thing I have with thinking about the Sweden game, because for me, kind of not just talking about Sweden, but this entire group stage, so much depends on the first 2 games, the Netherlands game, the Tunisia game, and the reason why is the gap between match days shrinks from match day 3 to the round of 32. And this is the case for whether Japan or any of the teams in Group F finish first, second, or third. So like it's like a 5 or 4 day gap between match day 1 and 2, 2 and 3, but then between match day 3 and the round 32, it's like only 3 days. So clearly for me, a big task for Japan is to get at least 4, hopefully 6, but at least 4 points from the first 2 games and then rotate heavily against Sweden. So we can be completely ready for the match, the round of 32 game, regardless of where Japan finishes, first, second, or third, because the tough thing about Group F is not just each of the opponents inside the group, which are all very tough, as we've kind of mentioned. It's also the round of 32 opponents are extremely difficult as well. Like, I think Japan are super unlucky in the 2026 World Cup just because of the group stage, and the bracket is probably like one of the most difficult across pretty much all the Asian sides. Like the only group tougher for like an Asian side is Iraq's group, right? I think that's pretty obvious. But after that, I think Japan has a really tough group. And yeah, because like whether you finish first or second, then it's Brazil or Morocco, or maybe Scotland gets an interesting result and messes the group up. And then if we finish third, like it's most likely one of France, Senegal, or Norway. So yeah, for me, I'm not thinking too much about the Sweden game yet. I watched a few of their matches, like they've improved a bit under Potter, but like they're still very much a team that's a work in progress, right? Yeah, like we said, like we said for all the teams in this group, like they have good players. Some of them are still coming back from injury, like Alexander Isak's slowly been getting back to fitness for Liverpool, but he's still he still hasn't been playing at his best form at all. And then you still have guys like Kulusevski. I think he's back in training for Spurs, but I don't think he's actually played a minute back in the Premier League yet. So like but even without those guys, like Gyökeres, like he's a player that divides opinions at the Premier League level, but at the international stage, it's a lot easier for him, I think, and for players of his type to kind of do damage in these kind of at the national team level. So people like him, and of course you have Mitoma's teammate Yasin Ayari, who's a really good midfielder that I quite like. And while their defenders probably aren't like kind of like the world class players that you might see compared to a team like the Netherlands, they're still experienced guys like Lindelof. Altanaka's teammate Gudmundsson is quite good, going back up and down on the wing from the wing back position. Carl Starfelt, I remember watching quite a bit when he was at Celtic. He's at Celta Vigo right now, right? But yeah, like I feel like with Sweden, at least from the games that I've seen so far, there's still lots of question marks in regards to how they're going to play as a team still, right? And I feel like because the formations are going to be very similar, it's going to be very much a man-to-man kind of duels all across the pitch, and it's going to be really important for our wingbacks to beat their wingbacks on the dribble and get cutbacks and other chance creations and that kind of stuff in. So yeah, that's my kind of thought on Sweden so far. I think before the group and the kind of knockout bracket was kind of drawn back in December, like I think expectations were quite high. But now with given how I just talked about in the previous question about how difficult the group and the knockout bracket is, it's really difficult to say. I think expectations are still high because I do think we're a good team, but just because of like how the teams in our group are playing styles are pretty, exactly the kind of teams that are difficult for Japan, right? The ones that defend deep, are also good at set pieces, can cause a lot of trouble with their physicality, those kind of teams, as well as the potential round of 32 knockout opponents are all super, super difficult. So yeah, but on the other hand, like regardless of what and who our opponents are, like this is the hand we're dealt with, so we just kind of have to go with it and do the best we can, right? So in that sense, I do think Japan have progressed a lot in these past 4 years, even with the kind of blip in the Asian Cup, right? Because even at the 2022 World Cup and even before that, when Japan were playing like a top team, like a top 10-ish team, we'll be defending in a low block with like 20% possession and like hanging on for dear life. But nowadays, over the past, year or so, even though, they were just friendlies, like we're getting closer to like, let's say around like 30, 35% ball possession. We're playing a bit higher and like a mid block, until like the very last stages of the games. And we're able to also attack more and sustain more possession as well against these big sides. So that's promising in that sense, right? But yeah, it's really tough to say where Japan might finish because, I don't think we'll get grouped. I don't think we'll finish fourth at all. There's a small possibility always, of course, but like, I don't think that's a possibility. That's too much of a possibility, right? So like I said, everything depends on the round of 32 game. How we are able to prepare for it in terms of like, getting those 4 to 6 points in the first 2 match days, and then being able to rotate against Sweden match day 3 without any scares or issues about whether we'll get knocked out by goal difference as a third place team or not. Like, I think that's the bare minimum. If we win the round of 32, I think that momentum and that belief can really push us far, and that could get us to the quarterfinals easily. Right. And then at that point, it just like, we might as well just, try to go for it. Like there's nothing stopping us at that point, I think. But yeah, that round of 32 game is really, really key. And that pretty much makes or breaks our entire tournament and the entirety of the past 4 years. So, no pressure on those guys playing in the games. Right. Yeah. So it's either round of 32 or quarterfinals. Like those two are like, yeah. Those two are the...
With kind of Japan at the World Cup in the past, there's been this history of this team kind of not being able to win a knockout stage match. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if it's hanging over the head of these players at this point, where it's not just the teams that they've lost to, but it's also in the manner that they've lost some of these matches. You go back to 2018 and the painful way that they had to exit that tournament against Belgium, and the losing in PKs against Croatia in 22. Do you think that's a mental block at all in terms of like added pressure for these players going into a knockout stage match, knowing like it's something we have, like this team's like historically hasn't been able to achieve? Like they've been able to get into these matches and find themselves in up to or controlling a match against Croatia at times, and they're still unable to move past that and and move on in the tournament. Do you find that to be something that's going to add extra pressure for this group?
I mean, yeah, it is obviously going to be pressure, but that's the kind of pressure that almost any team has to deal with, because every World Cup there's always going to be a very different group of players anyway. So like the kind of only player that I could really see having that kind of mental block is like someone like Nagatomo, who's like done it like a lot of times already, right? But I know, like for a lot of players, this is going to be their first World Cup. So I don't think it's going to be too much of a pressure in that sense. I think it's going to be more pressure just being in the World Cup, just in general, right? Whereas, yeah, like I feel like, yeah, it's difficult to say really. But yeah, like I don't think it should be a problem because these players are like a lot better now, and especially guys like Mitoma and Ao Tanaka who were there last time, they have that experience, and like they've really leveled up since then in the past 4 years, moving up across different leagues, different environments, different countries. So yeah, like I hope it's not like an extra amount of pressure, because I think there's already enough pressure already, given how a lot of people consider this to be like our best generation and blah blah blah. How easily we were able to breeze through the World Cup qualifier. So there's already enough pressure in that sense. So yeah.
You spoke about different groups of players kind of being at each World Cup. The tournament allows for a lot of players to kind of break out and make a name for themselves. You look back at 2022, two names that kind of stand out for me were obviously Mitoma, but also Doan, players that moved clubs. I think Doan had joined Freiburg the summer before the World Cup, had joined Brighton, I guess, the year before, but he was out on loan. So it was his first year kind of with the Premier League side in a full capacity, and they really made a name for themselves. Doan, particularly with the 2 goals that he scored. I'm curious with kind of the pool of players that this Japanese national team has. We'll talk about the injuries later on. do you have any players in mind that can really make a name for themselves that maybe, us as Asian football fans know better, but like in terms of world football, might be more obscure names that have a potential to really put themselves on the radar of the worldwide fan base of the sport?
So I think with Mitoma's most recent injury, I think the guy that really has to step up is Keita Nakamura. He wasn't at the last World Cup. He only really started to make a name for himself after that World Cup, and then at the Asian Cup as well. So I think with Mitoma probably either going to be out completely or is going to be kept on ice and like maybe used for like the last 10, 20 minutes by match day 3 or something like that. Then it really puts the kind of responsibility of that left side attack, whether Nakamura starts at left wing back or like the left side of number 10, whichever, like a lot of expectations are now going to be thrust upon him. So yeah, I think he's probably number one in terms of like, because, he did play for Lask in Austria. And then, he had his first season in, Stade Reims. Didn't really go as planned with like, relegation and all that. So probably not a lot of people know about him, even though he has been playing in Europe for, at least 5 years now. No, more than that. But yeah. So we as Asian football enthusiasts know a lot about him, obviously. Everyone in this chat right now. But yes, I think Keita Nakamura is going to be someone that surprises. Well, like, I say that, and, he played really well in the England game, and he got a lot of media attention from that game. Like, the English media were, like, really, really, like, getting buzzed about him. So, like, maybe he's someone that some people at least have kind of picked up on if they don't watch the Japan national team or regularly. But yeah. The other two I would say is Kaishu Sano. Again, like, if you watch the Bundesliga, like, anyone who watches the Bundesliga knows he's probably, like, the best defensive midfielder in the league, probably. But, a lot of people don't watch the Bundesliga. So, like, that's kind of an issue there. So, like, and, like, he's a person that's probably going to get a big move soon. There's been lots of transfer buzz around him. So a good World Cup here, showing his stuff definitely could be a springboard for, even more attention and even more destinations to sign him. And then the last one I would say is probably the most kind of obscure, I guess, is Junosuke Suzuki. He really kind of just came out of nowhere for Shonan Bellmare back in the late in the 2024 season. And then, because of all the injuries to our center backs, he started playing as the left-sided center back throughout the friendlies from last year, and he's been really, really good. To the point that even with Hiroki Ito returning from injury, like, I think Junosuke Suzuki should be the one that should be starting. And like he's been playing for FC Copenhagen since last summer. And he's actually, was playing in the Champions League, and he played against like Lamine Yamal when Copenhagen playing against Barcelona, stuff like that. So like people know about him, I think, but he probably doesn't have as big as a buzz as even like Keita Nakamura, Kaishu Sano, like the people I've already talked about. So yeah, I think with Japan probably going to have to be defending for, even as good as Japan are now, we're still going to be defending a lot, I feel. So Junosuke Suzuki is going to be very important in that sense. And also his, on the ball ability from defense, passing and being able to carry the ball up, and, being a very big contributor in the build-up phase is going to be really important for us. Yeah. I think those three. And then I have a couple other ones that are like more like if they get picked, right? So like that's players like Yuto Suzuki, Kodai Sano, Ryunosuke Sato, Shiogai, and Keisuke Goto. Yeah, those are kind of like the guys that probably, if they do get picked, are going to be coming off the bench and may surprise a few people. So
I followed Shonan Bellmare as my home club in J1, so, or I guess not J1 anymore. So I'm well aware of what Junosuke has done. I was at his national team debut when Japan hosted Indonesia last summer. And I'll add the positional versatility of him. Like, he can play as an outside center back in the back three, but he can also play. We saw him going as a wing back against England, and so there's that extra versatility where maybe you don't see him start in the back three to start a match, but with the especially on the left side, the depleted kind of roster with if Mitoma's out and Nakamura's kind of burnt out 70 minutes into a match and you're up a goal. Like, I feel like he's the profile of a player where he can still break lines with his passing and on the ball ability, but still like be a very defensive contributor. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
And like
he's consistently been my pick as like the breakout player for this national team. So
yeah, and like he can also play just as a regular fullback in the back four as well if things come to it, right? So like we kind of talked about like how, Moriyasu might suddenly switch to the back four all of a sudden to kind of surprise people. And like, that's where someone like Junosuke Suzuki can come into play because, he's so versatile. Like the case with a lot of our other center backs who can play multiple positions. And like that's been the kind of key for Japan, that we have a lot of players who are good enough to be playing in Europe at various levels, but are also technically and physically good enough to be playing in multiple positions without a whole lot of issues. So yeah, that's one of the key things for Japan heading into this World Cup.
Yeah, and then moving on from players who can make a name for themselves, I think right now Takefusa Kubo is a player that a lot of football fans worldwide know. And I know he was there at the last World Cup, but I think we can all agree he's a much more experienced player now, and he's made a name for himself. I mean, he spent 7 seasons now in La Liga, and he's only turning 25. A lot of top Asian players don't play that many seasons at the top level in their whole careers. That itself is already a big achievement. So I want you to talk about what his role would be with the Japanese national team heading into the World Cup.
Right. So for him, it's, at the 2022 World Cup, he was selected, but he couldn't really do too much, especially because, Japan were stuck defending for so long in all those games. And, like he got subbed off at halftime in the Germany game, I think, right? And because, we're just defending and so like stuff like that. So he couldn't really show his ability in that World Cup, and it was quite frustrating for him, especially to miss the Croatia game completely because I think he was ill, or like I don't think it was COVID, but he like had some kind of flu or sickness, which meant he missed the game completely. He wasn't even on the bench. So he has that kind of frustration kind of penned up inside of him, and he's talked about that before, and like that's why this World Cup is going to be a big event for him, especially with him turning 25 summer, as you said, Erfan, right? He should be entering the peak of his career right now, soon-ish. So like this is really the World Cup to kind of make a name for himself and establish himself, get a goal and or assist, right? Yeah, and he's a player that's kind of, he had a good first few two-ish seasons at Real Sociedad, but he's been injured a lot. And also his team around him has also kind of been suffering as well. So like he hasn't had that big move to a big club that a lot of people were thinking he would have achieved by now. So like in that sense, this summer is really important for him to kind of, make a statement to, for himself, but also for like any potential buyers who might be looking at him with like, some kind of doubts and trepidation, I feel, because like he's also been injured a lot, like I said. So yeah, in an attack, especially with Minamino gone, right, and Ritsudo and Jin Ito most likely playing more at wingback instead, like he really has to kind of take leadership in terms of like how we attack. So yeah, it's a big and super important World Cup for Takefusa Kubo. So Moriyasu has been in the job since 2018. It's been a very long time, and it's pretty unprecedented, right? Because usually Japan changes manager after one cycle, one World Cup, and then we switch to someone else. So having Moriyasu be in the job for 8 years across 2 World Cups is unprecedented. And, it's been a wild roller coaster of a journey, I should say, because, and I talked about the Asian Cup before, but, like he's had a lot of issues, but he's also had a lot of triumphs, right? We've seen a lot of the yin and yang of Moriyasu over the years. He's been at times extremely stubborn with his squad choices and his tactics. But then all of a sudden he has this kind of like, moment of inspiration and then he changes, from back 4 to back 3, and then we win against Germany and Spain and stuff like that, right? But overall, while I was very critical of him at the Asian Cup, where I think he made some poor squad choices heading into the cup itself, and then the tactics within the group stage as well, right? And also, of course, the Iran game, where I think he got his tactics all completely wrong. But since then, he been a lot more, less critical of him, at least, right? Because I think he's done quite a decent job since then. Like, even if we say like Japan were always going to qualify with the expanded format anyways, I mean, yes, that is true, but nevertheless, this qualifying cycle, like we talked about in the first part of this podcast, that it's quite unprecedented how easily Japan were able to qualify. Whereas, before it was always, we qualified, but it was always a tough going, right? So in that sense, Moriyasu did a really good job switching to the back 3 and with the very attacking wing backs, and also like his kind of man management strategy and like being able to Japan have a really big talent pool, very wide talent pool. It's not like we don't have the kind of superstars that you see in other teams or even other Asian sides, let's say. But we have so many players playing across different levels of Europe, and we have so much depth that even with all the injuries that we had, Moriyasu did a really good job of like being able to incorporate so many different players playing in all different sort of leagues and all different sort of systems at the club level into the the back 3-4-2-1 formation. And I think that's that kind of large group strategy, which is the term he uses. Large group is exactly the kind of like strength in numbers, strength in depth, and like the kind of chemistry and understanding across the entire squad that Moriyasu has built, especially over the past 2 years since that disastrous Asian Cup. So so going into this World Cup now, he's faced with a lot of extremely difficult choices, right? In terms of like the number of players who are injured, and also the number of players who have been injured and now are coming back to full fitness. So like I really don't envy Moriyasu the kind of decisions he has to make, right? The big question marks over Minamino, Wataru Endo, and then even someone like Hidemasa Morita, who who's been fit. Moriyasu has not picked him for like almost a year now, for various reasons, right? Like he has, there's a lot of external and I'm sure internal pressure on him with the squad choice announcement coming up this Friday on the 15th. So it's going to be really tough. And like I said, Moriyasu is a manager that divides a lot of opinion, and like that opinion changes a lot almost like every couple months. Yeah, it's really difficult. Yeah.
You spoke about the injuries, so I kind of want to ask you. I mean, the first couple that really come to mind, obviously Minamino, Endo, and Machida were hurt a bit previous to like this month, and then Mitoma and Yuta Suzuki both get injured within the span of roughly a week with a broken collarbone. And I don't really know how the severity of what Mitoma's hamstring injury looks like. I don't know if any of us truly know at this point, but I'm curious first if do you foresee any of these players actually making the roster? I guess Mitoma would be the closest out of the 5, but I'm curious what you think there.
The thing with Yuta Suzuki is I think Yuta Suzuki actually might be able to make it because Moriyasu actually came out and said that, we were in contact with Yuta Suzuki and, Freiburg and all of that. And like they performed a surgery on him on his clavicle or whatever his collarbone was, like 4 hours after the game. They're very specific about that. And like they said, that he would be able to make it to the squad at least. So, and it's a collarbone injury. So it's not like he can't be on like a bicycle or like a treadmill or stuff, right? So like it's not as bad as Mitoma's hamstring injury, which is a lot more severe because he probably, can't do any running drills or even just, walking and doing stuff like that. So yeah, I think Yuta Suzuki, given the injuries to Minamino and Mitoma, is more likely to make it. We'll see what the official call is on Friday, but nevertheless, Minamino, it's very difficult. He's been such a key player. He's our top goal scorer among the current squad over the past couple years. And he also scores important goals for the team. We saw that all throughout the World Cup qualifiers and the friendlies since then as well. But, he's back in training. Monaco, I've been doing a lot of PR, showing him on Instagram and, doing all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't really know how, just because you're back in training doesn't necessarily mean you're able to go, fully back into games yet. There's been, a lot of cases with certain players, that are able to make it back into training, but it still takes another month or even 2 months for them to be fully back fit, right? So that's the big question mark with Minamino. As someone who doesn't have any access to, what's happening behind the scenes, I can't really say. But it seems unlikely he makes it. But given how he's already back in training, there's still a slight chance, right? But it really depends on what kind of information Minamino and Monaco's medical staff has shared with Moriyasu and etc. Taro Endo is another interesting one, right? Because he's been the captain. He's been a very important player for Moriyasu. Moriyasu has a huge amount of trust in Endo because, even when Endo was fit, he was barely playing for Liverpool these past 2 seasons for various reasons. And then he got that big injury earlier this year and, So again, it's tough because, someone like me, we don't have a lot of the information that will make, that'll make it easy for us to have conclusions, right? But I feel like if Endo is fit enough in terms of being able to get back on the pitch, because we still have another month and a few days before the first game against the Netherlands. I do feel that out of these players, Moriyasu is most likely going to try and pick Endo just because of how important it is to the team off the field and also on the field. He's kind of lost his place, obviously, to Takefusa Sano as kind of midfield destroyer, right? But nevertheless, I think, out of the walking injured kind of players, I think he is actually the most likely to kind of make it on the plane. I don't think he'll start necessarily, especially with how well Kamada and Kashisano have been playing together as a pair nowadays, but I think that's the big one. And okay, so going to Tomiyasu, I think that's the other big one, right? For me, given how, after that slight injury he had in March that led him to missing out, he otherwise was able to show that he is able to play at least around 60, 70 minutes. I was watching his games against Sparta Rotterdam and Feyenoord, where he was actually able to play around 70 minutes. And he looked really good, right? But nevertheless, there's still a lot of question marks around his ability to play 90 minutes with intensity at the World Cup level against World Cup level opponents like the Netherlands. So for me, it's about, as long as he doesn't get injured from, now till Friday, and then further on, I think he's definitely on the plane. I actually do think he's really on the plane because just how much of a difference in level he is in the terms of ability to everyone else in the team in terms of defending and also his ball playing abilities, right? He's, when it comes to, when it comes to our defense, Tomiyasu is the guy. So, and for me, the way I think Moriyasu is going to use him is he will be playing as kind of like the defensive super sub, coming on in the last 20, 30 minutes of each of these games to kind of shore things up, whether as one of the center backs to add a bit of height to the back line. And we might also be playing as an emergency wing back, as a more defensive option as a wing back, because, late in games, like we saw against England, we get really pushed back into our own box, and having someone like Tomiyasu who's a really good 1v1 defender, right? Being able to throw him on at wing back to shut down the opponent's most dangerous winger who's good on the dribble, stuff like that. I think that's the way we're going to use him. I do not think he's going to be starting, even if we pick him. I really do think he's going to be a defensive super sub. And I think that's the safest way to use him without, breaking him because, he's still 27. He still has quite a few years left to play. We don't have to force him to play full 90 at this World Cup, given, we've, with all the center back injuries, we've actually found quite a few, hidden gems in terms of Junosuke Suzuki and other players, right? Yogo Taniguchi has come back from his own injury troubles to be like one of the leaders, the center of the back three and stuff like that. So yeah, I think Moriyasu will pick 7 center backs instead of in normal cases with the back three, you would normally choose around 6, but with Tomiyasu, I think we'll pick 7 and we'll have him as the kind of emergency center back in that sense. So yeah, I think I
A
covered
couple
all the
things.
injuries.
Yeah. I think so. But the first thing is the hydration breaks at the World Cup. I think will lean to benefit some of these players that might not be match fit to have additional breaks throughout the match, because you're going to have one now. You're not going to be running for over 30 minutes at a time in these matches now. So it probably plays to the benefit of the Japanese national team when you have players that might not necessarily be fit for a full 90 to have extra stoppage in play. And the other thing is I'm not entirely sure how many players that are not fit to play a full 90 you can actually afford to take on a roster at once.
Exactly.
Even if all these players are fully fit to play, it's how many can you actually afford to have on the roster at once?
Right. Yeah.
So it'll be a
Yeah, I
It'll be a
kind of
dis-
talked about this I did a little blog post about the Japanese national team after the March friendlies, right? And I talked about how we have Minamino, Endo, Tomiyasu, Koki Machida, who's a player I really liked, also coming back. And I was like, there's only and it's exactly like you said, Kenta. You can only have so many of these kind of walking injured, suddenly recovered players in your squad, even with the fact that the kind of squad for the World Cups have been expanded to 26, and there's 5 substitutes available as well, right? And even with all that, it's really difficult to have too many of these kind of walking injured guys in your squad, because I know each player has a knock-on effect on other positions. And then, if those players get injured, then the other players that step up also have to play a lot more, which then means that those players also have a higher chance of getting injured. So it has this domino effect. So you really have to be careful about not picking too many. So that's why for me, I really do think it's going to be only 2 out of the 5, 6 people I've mentioned in the past. Right. So it's most likely going to be Tomiyasu, and one of Endo and Minamino out of the kind of medium to long term absentees. So I think so just 2 out of the 5 or 6 of the long term returnees. So yeah, in that sense, yeah.
World Cup. Japan, their fan base is pretty. I feel like they get coverage every World Cup for there's a video circulating of the fans picking up trash after, and they're look at the Japanese fans. That aside, there's a pretty decent contingent of Japanese population living in Dallas. I know there's a Toyota factory over there that employs a lot of them, and there's also a Mitsuya market, which I'm very jealous of because there's not one close to me where I live in Cincinnati. I'm curious what you expect in terms of turnout from the Japanese fan base. They seem to always show up, but I'm curious what you think there, and also the perception of this tournament back home over in Japan.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, and like you said, there is significant Japanese, either people and cheering the team on. So I think that's gonna be a nice thing to see. But in terms of actual Japanese people coming from Japan to the World Cup, it's gonna be really difficult, I think, because of the big problem is inflation. Japan has been hitting regular people hard here, and also the currency exchange rate is for companies it's been great because they export a lot of stuff, but for regular people it's been a really big problem, and on top of inflation, right? So it's I don't claim to be really have a huge amount of insight to all these people, but in that kind of economic sense, it is pretty tight and it is pretty rough. So yeah, and it's not just about the kind of, there's been a lot of talk about the tickets themselves, right? Being exorbitant prices. But then you also have the flights to consider, the accommodations, And also the food in the US, the inflation's also high in the US as well, right? And then on top of that, you have Japanese people coming over with the yen, and that makes it even more from what I've been hearing, like a lot of Japanese people who've been visiting the US, they bring their own food because it's literally too expensive to like buy out and buy stuff from American groceries or even going to like takeout and stuff like that. So like that's the kind of issues we're facing here, right? But nevertheless, like Japan always has pretty big support, and like Japanese culture, especially Japanese fan culture, means that the people who want to go are just, they're not going to care about the price, right? I'm sure like, you might have heard about like, the oshikatsu or like those kind of like people who like really, really are big into fandom here in Japan. Like those people do not care anything about, how much something costs. They just, they just pay it. So like, I expect those people to go regardless, right? And then I think there's quite a few people that are going to be fan sitting until the very last moment in terms of like seeing whether those ticket prices drop and stuff like that. So yeah. So we'll see about that. But yeah, in terms of like, fan support, there's still going to be a decent amount of people. So yeah.
Moving back to the team, I know throughout today you mentioned a lot of what the team's good at, but if you can just tell us one or maybe two strengths of this Japanese national team heading into the World Cup.
Right. So yeah, it's kind of taking a lot of the things I've said over the past hour or so that we've been talking, right? So, we've been playing this 3-4-2-1 formation since the Asian Cup. Everyone knows the roles and the tasks required. And we can kind of, slot in different players at different positions. We can move players around from different positions. Like Daichi Kamada can play in the double pivot, but he can also play up top, like in the attack behind the striker. All of our wingbacks can also play in attack. And Daiza Maeda can even play striker on top of that. Right? The center backs can also be fullbacks, and like Itakura and Tomiyasu can even be playing in midfield, right? So like stuff like that is always really nice. And like, stuff like, the stereotypes about Asian teams is always stuff like, disciplined, right? But I think in this case, for this Japanese national team heading into this World Cup, it's actually quite true because of like how well trained we are and how cohesive we are as a unit and this kind of tactical understanding we have of this 3-4-2-1 formation. And I think the best highlight of that was the England game, where we defended really well in that mid block for a majority of the game until like the last 10 or 20 minutes where we're really pushed in to our own box. But yeah, like, so stuff like that, right? And yeah, and like I said, like, yeah, it's about depth as well. And we have, Mitoma's recent injury really does kind of put a spanner in the works in terms of our depth, because like his injury kind of has a knock-on effect on not just the left wing back position, but other positions as well, especially when there is injuries in other positions, right? So like we're really kind of like, it's depth is been a big strength, but it's also like we're really, really kind of like, it's getting to a point where we're really running thin, and it's a bit scary in that sense because, a month to the World Cup, there's still going to be a few games left in league season, and there's going to be other wear and tear stuff happening in training sessions heading into the World Cup as well. So yeah, it is quite scary in that respect. So, but still, it is a nice strength. Yeah. Right. So I think one issue for me is kind of like I talked a lot about depth and how that's a strength, but I feel like the one position that we're kind of short on is striker, because after Ayase Ueda, there's lots of question marks. Because players like Keisuke, Koki Ogawa, Yuto Mashino are, decent players who play in Europe, and like on paper, they're not bad, but usually for the national team, they haven't been that great. And also Machino just hasn't been playing a whole lot at Gladbach as well either. And then from there, it's like, we've got Keisuke Goto and Kento Shiogai who are still, who have big potential, but there's still questions about them being able to make a big impact. So that's one issue because, right now it's really about, Ayase Ueda or bust, because yeah, like he's so important to how, Japan play with his ability to hold up the ball. He's such a physical guy, which is something, you don't normally associate with Japanese strikers, especially without Takumi Minamino, who has 26 goals and is the leading goal scorer for the national team over the past couple, and it's Ueda with 16. And then, it's Junji Ito with 15, Kamado with 12. So yeah, and in that sense, it's a problem because, you never know if Ueda's going to get injured. And then we have to start with, Koki Ogawa or someone else. And that's, I think that's a bit of a step down, I think. And that also has an impact on other positions because of how they interact with Ueda in the attack as well, right? So, yeah. Yeah, and I guess weaknesses, yeah, we did talk about a bit about the injuries, how, one injury to one player has a knock-on effect on multiple positions because, yeah. Let's see. I guess the kind of another stereotype, I should say, in terms of weaknesses, I guess people talk a lot about kind of set pieces, right? But for me, this is still a concern, especially against the Netherlands, I feel. I think almost any team in the world is always going to have an issue with set pieces against the Netherlands because, they're just that good, right? They're just that tall, they're just that big. And they also have so many tall guys, not just in defense, but also in the midfield and up top and everywhere. So, but the thing is, I feel like there's the set pieces. Japan are a lot more well prepared for, the kind of troubles coming from set pieces and general crosses than previous generations, right? Simply because you look at Japan squads in, previous generations, we usually had one big center back that played in Europe and then a bunch of J-League guys that were making up the depth next to him. Maya Yoshida. And then it was either Morishige in 2014 and then Gen Shoji in 2018. And then, going further back, you have even less, experienced options. But now look at our center back, unit, right? So many players that are quite tall themselves are also very good at headers. And, they all play at pretty high levels in Europe. So I think it's still a concern, especially when it comes to the Netherlands and probably even Sweden as well, right? But it's not as big of a huge panic button as it was before. And I think especially being able to keep a clean sheet against England and Scotland, two extremely physical sides that normally would be giving us a lot of trouble. I think it's a big boost of confidence for us in that sense. Yeah, because in outside set pieces in normal play, it's also one of the reasons why we switched to back three, right? So to handle those kind of teams that play long balls like Iraq and Iran played against us, we have that extra bit of security with the extra center back. And also I feel in terms of the tactics and strategies, we're just a lot more kind of prepared and ready for those kind of teams. So if we play Iraq and Iran now, I think it would turn out a lot differently. So that's something I guess we'll see in 6 months' time at the Asian Cup, hopefully. Yeah. So yeah, set pieces still concerned, but not as big as before. Some positives from there, but yeah. And I guess the last big one, kind of talked about this a bit before. It's the big question mark is Moriyasu. And I think you can understand why. It's because of, for all of his moments of brilliance, he also has, a lot of these kind of stubborn moments, or he kind of changes stuff without really, that have a negative effect. So that's a problem for me because, especially recently, I've been pretty positive on what Moriyasu has done, but, that lingering kind of fear that, he's going to do something really weird or silly at the World Cup that's going to backfire on him completely. That's is hiding in the back of my mind and kind of keeps me up at night. So that's another kind of, it's a bit of a weird weakness, I suppose, but yeah, it's a bit of a fear I do have in that regard. Anyway, no, I guess I just want to say, yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. We've talked a decent amount on social media before, so it's nice to actually, meet you guys face to face, or at least online face to face, right? And talk about, Asian football. And I hope, we can have a lot of positive things to say about each Asian team at the World Cup in a month's time, hopefully. And then, even right after the World Cup, we have the Asian Cup. So, like, lots of interesting Asian football content. And, hopefully you guys will, welcome me back on, in the near future. So yeah. Otherwise, yeah. Thanks for having me on. Everyone can follow me on Twitter. And also, I write all about Japanese football, the J League, the Japan national team. I'll be pretty active during the World Cup. All on Shogun Soccer. Shogun Soccer. That's my newsletter. So yeah, thanks again, and yeah. Have a nice day, everyone.